Swab, everything good out of one?
Yeah, all right. Shalom, Lord Christ is officer of 1,000 Yahweh, and this is the Monday night history class. Today's topic is the history of Brazil. All right. Um, a lot of people don't know a lot about the history of Brazil because it's been a lot of conspiracies. They don't tell you a lot what happened to those people. You know, it's been kind of swept under the rug. Like they did a lot of our other brothers. Like even with our slavery, right? They try to what they call it the transatlantic migration now. You know what I'm saying? They trying to cover up everything, man, because they don't want the shame to come upon them. They don't want like when they, as far as like they want to stand up and be like a beacon to the world, like this is how you do everything right. But yet they is the devil of the Bible, man. So all right, let's get down into it. The history of Brazil. Okay. Archaeological sites near the Amazonian towns of Santarém and Monte Alegre and elsewhere in Brazil show that the region has been inhabited since at least 9,000 BC. Mixed communities of farmers, fishers, and hunter and gatherers developed in the Amazon lowlands, whereas hunters and gatherers predominated the drier savannas and highlands. Between 2 million and 6 million indigenous Indians lived in the region at the time of European contact in 1500. So they already had a thriving, area. See, like they'll say the hunter gatherers, that's people that go and hunt and they would get meat, right? But here's the thing: they would go trade it with other tribes because some tribes might be better at hunting, some might be better at farming. So if you go, you got you go capture, a bison or something, right? You would go take that bison and trade it for fruit, you know, of course, it would have its, how much it would be or whatever, of course, but you would trade some of that meat for fruits and vegetables and all of that.
Right.
So they would trade amongst the tribes. And that's how, like, they all spoke, of course, different languages of everything, but how would they speak amongst each other, right? We gonna get into that a little bit too, but it had to be something that they spoke amongst each other, right?
Right.
And that was Hebrew, right? Because you'll say they spoke one language here, then how would they speak with the other tribes, right? What tribe are they again? Is that Naphtali or what is it?
Who was that? I don't want.
Brazil.
Um,
I know we got on the walls. I can't remember.
Brazil is that Naphtali?
I think so.
I think that's them.
Yeah, Naphtali. Yep.
Argentina and Chile.
Yeah, I think that's still in Chile. Yep. So a lot of that region got kind of mixed in as well. You would have different tribes that would migrate along in there. So, and then the borders, just because it say like Argentina to Chile, it's like the borders are fluid. You know what I'm saying? So they would have different tribes mixed in. Just like Seminoles, you had Seminoles that weren't all in Florida. You had other Seminoles spread about all over the southeast of the Americas, right? You think you even had some over in like Illinois and all that. You had Seminoles in different places, all right? And I think you even had some up in um in New York as well. So there would be, they'll spread out and migrate and all of that, of course. But it's just kind of like to kind of show you this is where this tribe is located. All right. And they spoke Tupia. So it's Tupian speaking Indians inhabited the coastal areas and were among the significant of the tropical forest groups. Portuguese explorers of the region first encountered Tupians and principally dealt with them for many years. Sloppy. Indeed, Tupians may have been the first important Indian influence in Brazil's early colonial period and in the culture that subsequently developed. However, European diseases decimated the indigenous population, and many surviving Indians endured harsh treatment under Portuguese domination.
It's a lot the other one.
Go ahead.
The information I got, Brazilians, Argentinians, and Venezuelans are Asher.
Asher, okay.
It's a lot.
So they're Asher. So, like I said, they're all mixed in that area. So it's like, you have some Naphtali, some Asher in there. So they'll be all mixed in, right? You got some Southern Kingdom over there too, because the largest amount of slaves went there. So
is that kind of like with like the Judites? Like you might have a Judite might be Gad, but he don't really know. You know what I'm saying? So is that like how you got to mix in with the Judites and the Gadites?
Yeah,
and stuff like that is the same thing?
Yeah, they got mixed in. And then like just how you and the brothers here, they'll think they Judah their whole life, and all of a sudden they start doing a little bit more research, they find out they Gad.
Right. Come.
So it's the same thing, yep.
Come.
It's just like the thing of it is, since that we still growing down in Brazil, we gonna get more, as we grow in the other countries, we gonna get a lot, a lot of that history is gonna come along with it, and we better get more archaeology. And if you really want to get like, of course, archaeology, you got to get that. I think they got it on Patreon, but if you go to Cross the Line Patreon, Captain Katazar got the best breakdown of the 12 tribes you gonna find.
Yeah, right.
So if you want to go there, you can pay for the Patreon, and he'll break down. I'm talking about it's about 3 hours of slides, and he said he had to condense it from 12 or more. So he had that much archaeology, and that's what they try to hide from us. They don't want us to know who we are, man.
Right.
They want us to think that you ain't nothing but a stinking African, or you Indian, which means savage. And then even like I'm reading here, if I'm not mistaken, like they calling them all the time cannibals. If I remember correctly, there was no cannibalism. The Europeans said so they could say that we need to take them over. But as far as I know, there's no proof of cannibalism.
It's a lot y'all want. Like I was getting. I mean, I ain't gonna say I was getting into it with somebody, but I was just going back and forth with somebody, and they was like, "Oh, you don't do this, you an Israelite, you this and that," and they started talking about, "Yeah, I eat booty and all that." I said, "Well, shit, you the damn cannibal. You eat booty, that's cannibal."
Exactly. All eating groceries, man. Exactly. So.
You a cannibal. You can't call us cannibal because we have a law we're supposed to follow. We don't know it. But when we start following our laws, we become different people. But you are the cannibal. You are the whatever. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot.
Exactly. So they go, man, the heathens are cannibals.
Right.
Like there's no cannibalism isn't as widespread as Europeans tried to make it. Like that didn't really happen. The only time you might have seen a little bit of cannibalism is in times of, desperation. People didn't necessarily just go and eat people. That was like it was like how you tell stories about stuff? Like, if you, how like you don't walk under a ladder.
Superstition.
Superstitious. Yeah. It's not cannibalism. It was not prevalent like ever. Did it happen at time to time? Yes, but it was never prevalent. Cannibal in any culture really was it ever really prevalent. It's just that's just the way. That's just what Europe. That was like the. If you were a sailor, that was like the the stories they were spread. Like you went over here and there was this place they was cannibals. You know what I'm saying? It was like when I used to be a truck driver, right? When you had I used to call it trucker tales. It's stuff that makes sense that they said happened, but it was a trucker tale, right?
Right.
That's what it is. It's a seller tale, man. That's it. Fairy tale. So a lot of it was just like, they would sit around and tell stories of, this is a story that happened in, like, John Hook, and it would be based upon something, but they would take it and make it more, bigger, to make it be a bigger story. You know what I'm saying?
Well, so like if I may out of one, like, you know how you can tell one person one thing, and then by the time we get to the person at the end, it's a whole nother story that's been trumped up. It's crazy.
Like even when I brought up about like Christmas and when it came about the like the reindeer and all of that, a lot of that stuff wasn't even added into the 1800s. So this stuff's relatively new. Some of it not even to the 1900s, early 1900s. So a lot of the celebratory things was just, it was somebody wanted to write a story, and they wrote something in a book to make a fairy tale story,
Right.
make it interesting, and then they made it part of a religion. That's basically what they made it, like a story for them.
Sorry about that one. That's like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That was part of a book that somebody, artist wrote, and now you think, like 200 years ago, they didn't know nothing about no damn Rudolph. You know what I'm saying? This was a new thing.
Right.
This was not anything that was like, this didn't come from no religion. It's just stuff that they'll add a story, they'll write a story, and it will sell some copies, and then now you just tell your children the story, you read it to your children, they read it to their children, they read it to their children. Now it's damn near a fact that Rudolph the Red-Nosed, he was a red-nosed reindeer. Had a very shiny nose, you know what I'm saying? Like, we all been taught it, man.
Right.
So, and that's where it just comes from. Telling a kid's story.
Okay.
So, and that's all of that is, even with cannibalism. From what I know and all of the, there isn't any, there isn't much, because if you was a cannibalism, you have like teeth marks on the bones, and they didn't really find that. That was just something that they would use to say that we need to take them over, because they're not Christians, they're savages.
Right.
They're eating each other.
Right.
You know what I mean? So as far as that, I know they would say something like the Isupk or the Aztecs, they would take the heart out of their victims. I don't even know if that's 100% true. Do you know how hard it is to get past this rib cage? Let's just be real. A lot of stuff they try to embellish, because they were trying to take them over.
Gotcha.
So you got to think about it, right? Think about even how this world is today, right? If you want to go do something evil, right, what you got to do, you have to make whoever you're doing the evil to even worse evil. Right?
Right.
And then when you do that, you seem like you're doing the right thing. Just think about even how they do black people. You have black people, they say that you're doing the crimes, you're doing all of these, but they're the ones giving you the drugs, the weapons. Like there's been reports, black people saying, look, it's a random crate of weapons sitting here with bullets and everything, just
like,
in the middle of the street. They trying to set you up.
Right.
And I'm not talking no cheap weapons, I'm talking, some legit stuff.
So I got on. I mean, you getting high powered weapons. You ain't getting no pop. You getting stuff that can knock down a whole block.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
You getting Uzis,
all that.
You getting shotguns, all that. They're just dropping them in the street. I'm not talking like monster. I'm talking about like Kel-Tec. You know what I'm saying? You getting those ones. So
I got on. You get military style weapons.
Exactly, military style. fully auto,
Right.
and it's illegal. It's illegal to have fully auto in America, unless it's some certain stuff you gotta have. But it's for you to just go have a fully automatic weapon is illegal, right? Just the basis of it is illegal, but they'll have it and give it because they want them to commit crimes. Because when they commit crimes, guess what happens? You go to prison, and now you a slave again.
Okay.
So you think an investment of $10,000, $15,000 can turn into a couple $1,000,000 in the future, and that's an investment to them. They enslave you, but then they gotta make the slaves look bad.
Right.
Right? So now they show all of the crime that they do. They don't show all of the crime that devils do. They always gotta show the crime, and they gotta talk a certain way. Even like when black people they was leaving from New Orleans, when all of the stuff happened, they was calling them refugees. What the hell?
Right.
Ain't they supposed to be American citizens?
Right.
And what the hell, how the hell is they a refugee?
Right. Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? They part of the country. They just going from one part to another part.
But they, they're not in war though. They were coming from a disaster.
Exactly.
And then you got people that's coming over from the Ukraine and all that shit. Y'all got different names for them.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm saying? These people just trying to survive.
Yep.
Trying to survive.
And you got all over social media, everywhere you go, we stand with Ukraine, but they didn't want to stand with the black people that was in New Orleans. You didn't see all that about New Orleans, did you?
No.
Nothing. Haiti, when the Haitians they was over there in Mexico, you didn't even hear nothing about it till the UPK started talking about it.
Damn right.
You didn't even know nothing about them Haitians over there, right?
Right.
You didn't even know nothing about it until then.
Right.
So that's what they do. They'll tell, certain stories so now they can come and, they won't have the pushback. It's all politics, right? You say these people is evil. They did the same thing when I brought out about the Panamanians. They said, okay, this man, he has got to be destroyed because he wasn't playing ball with America no more. That's it. That's the only reason why. So now now they got to go put smear campaigns out and say that he's a terrorist and all of this. Right. You see it every election. Whenever they have election, they got smear campaigns of the other person that's getting elected. This message has been approved by Governor so and so. You see it all the time. They do the same thing. They put the dark colors. They damn near put little devil horns on them. Damn near.
Lucky I don't want. They did a smear campaign with Keisha Bottom and talked about her macaroni. Now they was burnt like black people gonna be like, man, she can't cook macaroni. We ain't fucking with her.
Exactly. It's just silly stuff. That's what they'll do. They'll try to smear somebody. Once you do that, now if something happens to that person, now you don't feel they're not human to you. You start talking about these are cannibals. They eat people. They need to be now they say they need to be civilized. Right? That's what they say. They need to be civilized. But just to make things make sense, if they really was cannibals, why ain't no reports of no devils getting eaten? Let's go with that. Did you hear any report ever that in your life of that? If they were cannibals? Never.
Right. Man, that's heavy right
They
there.
only ate each other, so-called. Like I said, it's a smear campaign. Could it have happened? Of course, it could have happened. But what I'm saying is, there is no evidence of it, that they were cannibals. There is no evidence of it. You don't hear one story about, because if a devil got ate up, they gonna talk about that. You ate Johnny, you know what I'm saying? They gonna talk all about that. But there's never been any record of that, because more than likely it didn't happen. Alright. Let's get back to the topic. Early period. Exploration, initial settlement. Europeans explored the Brazilian coastline only after mapping parts of the Caribbean Sea and the northeastern coast of South America. Moreover, intensive exploration of Brazil resulted indirectly from Portugal's efforts to expand its colonies in Africa and Asia. In 1498, the Portuguese navigator Vasco da Gama discovered an all-water route to the Indies and the Spice Islands via Africa's Cape of Good Hope. The Portuguese king, hoping to capitalize on this discovery, dispatched an imposing armada to India under Pedro Alvarez Cabral, whose sailing directives had been drawn up by Gama himself. To avoid the calms of the Gulf of Guinea, Cabral bore so far to the west that on April 22nd, 1500, he sighted the mainland of South America. The Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494 between Spain and Portugal had established a line at about a longitude of 46 degrees and 30 west that divided Spanish west and Portuguese east claims in the New World. The region cited by Cabral lay well within the Portuguese zone, and the crown promptly claimed it. Portugal's new possession was initially called Vera Cruz, means true cross, but it was soon renamed Brazil because of the copious amounts of Brazil wood found there that yielded a valuable red dye. So they had even seen part of it when they were trying to go around Africa, because they're trying to, because like basically they're trying to find different routes, because let's say if you're at war with a place but you need to go around and to go to somewhere else to do trade and to make money, now you can each find that way to go around to get to India. And he had went so far west that he had seen the mainland of South America. All right? The tidings of Cabral's landing aroused great enthusiasm among the Portuguese, and the crown began to sponsor major transatlantic explorations, including that of the Italian navigator Amerigo Vespucci, whose small fleet, that's who America is named after, Amerigo Vespucci, whose small fleet sailed along the coast of Brazil and for the first time estimated the extent of the land. Vespucci, calendar in hand, baptized several points on the coast with the names of the saints whose days they were discovered. So the name, like they would name them, Sao Paulo, let's talk about St. Paul. So they would name them different places after when they found them. Of course, they go into somebody else's land and start naming it, whatever they want to name it. I'm going to go to your house and name it, the house of Yahweh, right? The tidings in Cabral's, interest in Brazil waned over the subsequent 2 decades. The Portuguese began a desultory trade with the Indians for Brazil wood, but they failed to discover the precious metals in Brazil and thus focused their attention on the lucrative trade with Asia. So they had to trade with Asia first with that Brazil wood. So that was the first thing. They didn't know about all of the precious metals and all of the gold that was in South America and all of the other oils and oil. Like oil is really, really big in South America. There's a lot of place to get. It's a lot of oil there. You got coal. It's just rich in resources, right? Okay. Brazil became a sort of a no man's land over which the Portuguese crown wielded only a shadowy control, and European rivals quickly took advantage of that neglect. The French, in particular, trespassed on Portuguese claims in South America and shipped the dyewood to Europe. Portugal's apathy ended. However, during the reign of between 1521 to 57 of John III, who gradually shifted the focus in colonial affairs from Asia to America. So he shifted. They wanted to get, get all of these affairs, get all of the money, the economy out of South America. So that's what we started focusing on. The Portuguese crown made the first systematic effort to establish a government in Brazil in 1533. It divided the colony into 15 hereditary captaincies or fiefs, each extending 50 leagues, i.e., about 160 miles along the coast, and an indefinite distance inland. These grants were distributed to favored persons. So now they took their land, split it up, and gave it to the people that they like. Chiefly courtiers who became known as donatarios or donees and wielded extensive rights and privileges. However, only two of the captaincies were ultimately successful. São Vicente in the present Sao Paulo state and Pernambuco. The former included the town of São Vicente, the growing port of Santos, and the village of Sao Paulo on the Cerro do Mar's fertile Piriguinja plateau, all of which had a combined population of about 5,000 in mid-16th century. The captaincy of Pernambuco developed in northeastern Brazil, centered on the town of Olinda. Its donatario, Duarte Coelho Pereira, converted Pernambuco into a great sugar-producing region, offering the first example of a profitable agrarian export from the New World to Europe. So they start setting up different trade over going to Europe, because Europe doesn't really have resources, so they were getting all of their resources from the Americas, right? Because Africa, everywhere has resources except for Europe. So Asia had resources, Africa had resources, everywhere has resources, just not there. They don't have anything there. So they were trying to make this was like say if you had a house, that's the house. They wanted to make us the garage where we can store all of the stuff and make it and give to them, right? And give it away. They can sell it to other countries, make more money. So now they actually have a resource that they can have. Because like I said, they didn't have anything. That's why they were, that's why they would just go in, that's how Rome survived. They would just go to other people's places and take their stuff. Because they didn't have anything there, right? Okay. See something real quick. All right, I'm trying to lock the board, y'all. Yes. Shalom on Christ, huh? What's going on?
Shalom, Lord Christ. Not much out of one. I've been checking in.
All right, sounds great. All right. Let me get some good stuff. I ain't trying to bore y'all with all these details. Hold on a second. Okay. Anybody got any questions so far? Okay. So now they made a government there. So King John III resolved to strengthen his authority in Brazil by unifying the inefficient donatarios under a central administration. He appointed as Governor General Tomé de Sousa, a Portuguese noble with impressive experience in Africa and India. Sousa landed in Brazil in Go ahead.
Slack out of one. Which king was that?
King John III.
King John III. Come on.
Sousa landed in Brazil in 1549 and founded Salvador, a capital from which Brazil was governed for 214 years. Sousa also placed local officials over the captaincies and fortified strategic points along the coast. In the cities, he established municipal organizations similar to those in Portugal. Brazil then began to attract settlers in increasing numbers. By 1600, Bahia and Pernambuco each had a population of roughly 2,000 Europeans and more than twice as many African slaves and Indians. So they started enslaving everybody, of course. So they basically, making everybody slaves because they don't want, they want to, they see the profit of the slave. So I even read that the average age of a slave was only to make it to 23 years of age. That was the average rate to live as a slave because they worked you literally to death. 23 years of age, and you would only, and the average time they were having slavery was like 7 years. But it was so profitable that it made sense. You know what I'm saying? It made sense for them. Go ahead.
Yeah, I got to say, I all of that. If I may.
Go ahead.
What you just said is so heavy about that expecting to live at 23 years old.
Mm-hmm.
That's just about in the 90s. I remember back in the 90s, that's what they used to say about black kids in America, that we would live to be 21, 23 years old, 25. Like that'll be great if you got that part. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot.
God, exactly. Like, just even in Deuteronomy chapter 28, it said you're gonna be fearful of your life, that you're not gonna have a long life. And this goes back even to that. You know what I'm saying? If anybody can find that real quick, let me know. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 28 where they saying that you're gonna be in fear for your life. You're not gonna, something like that, in reference to you're not gonna have a long life. All right. Okay. Slavery in Brazil began long before the first Portuguese settlement was established in 1516, with members of the tribe enslaving captured members of another. So yeah, there was like slavery. There's nothing wrong with if you take somebody over and you make them a slave, right? That's not a sin. What's a sin is the treatment of those people, right? Go ahead.
Was it Deuteronomy 28 and 66?
Read that for me.
The book of Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 66. And thy life shall hang in doubt before thee, and and thou shalt fear day and night, and shalt have no sense of insurance of thy life.
Exactly, that's heavy right there. Telling you not gonna have no insurance of your life. I don't know about y'all, but growing up, like, I didn't think I'd make it to 30, man. I wasn't even in, I wasn't selling drugs. I wasn't even living out. I'm just thinking like, hell, I'm gonna have cancer. You know what I'm saying? Anything. So I'm gonna have a car accident, man. I'm just gonna die. Just for no reason, just gonna die, man. And that's what, and that's why we live the way we live, man. We live recklessly because we don't have an assurance of our life. We don't, like, even brothers, like, even to the point of the reason why we don't save money is because we don't think we're going to live long enough to see it.
Come on.
Let's just be for real. Why don't brothers, like, okay, it was one time somebody said, like, I had a conversation with somebody before, and they were talking about lottery winners, right? They say they want their money now, because what they say, you don't know if you're going to see 20 years. Right. Other cultures don't feel like that, man.
Right.
That's just us that feel like that.
Right. We like the only culture that don't have an inheritance.
Exactly.
Or what they got in the bank where once they get a certain age they can have it. I can't think of what it is right now. But they have, they set their families up to be something as
You mean
they
like
get
a
older.
trust fund?
Like trust funds and stuff like that. Like we don't have that.
Exactly.
We won't even put insurance
Yeah,
on
life insurance.
ourselves
Yeah, you only have life insurance.
to take care of our people when something happened to us. We be like, shit, I'm dead. Hey, somebody gonna have to worry about that bill.
Yeah, our life insurance is GoFundMe. You know what I'm saying? That's our life insurance plan, GoFundMe. That's just the truth. You don't even have that, man, because we just, like, we know we gonna die, but we just spend all of our money because we feel as though we not gonna live long. Just to make it to, like, 30, surprise me, man. You know what I mean? Just living in hell. You don't have long lives, you living in hell.
Right.
You can't see tomorrow. You're not happy to have children. That's even in Deuteronomy 28. You're not gonna have the joy of having your children, man.
Heavy out.
You see what I'm saying? You're not gonna have that because they only lived to 23 years old, and this is slavery.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
And don't think they living better. They living that much better now. They living in squalor. Look at how the Brazilians live, man. How they got them living like poor. How is they poor, but they have so many natural resources?
Right.
That's why I said you gonna plant the grapes, and another man gonna eat the fruit thereof, man. You gonna plant the vineyards, and another man gonna take it from you. All of your land that you have, you got all these resources. You got, tobacco, sugar, all of this stuff, but none of the Brazilians make money off of. The only people you think making money, you think they Brazilians, them is devils. You look at their history, they is Portuguese. They is not from the native land. They is Portuguese. Their mom might have been Portuguese, but might have been native. But nah, them is Portuguese. Them is devils, man.
Okay.
All right. See here. During the Atlantic slave trade, Brazil imported more enslaved Africans than any other country. An estimated 4.9 million enslaved people from Africa were imported to Brazil during the period 1501 to 1866. Until the early 1850s, most enslaved African people who arrived at Brazilian shores were forced to embark at West Central African ports, especially in Luanda, which is present-day Angola. So that's where a lot of those tribes came from, Angola, in that area. Slave labor was the driving force behind the growth of the sugar economy in Brazil. And sugar was the primary export of the colony from 1600 to 1650. Because here's what happened, they didn't, like we read earlier, they didn't realize everything else. They only seen the agriculture side because they already was doing agriculture at that point. So now they just made them grow more of the agriculture, and now they can box it up and ship it off to Portugal. So now Portugal can have a thriving economy now because they got this, their backyard is full of, slaves and everything. So, hold on one second. All right, go back to it. Yeah, they had that sugar. So gold and diamond deposits were discovered in Brazil in 1690. Right? Hold on a second. Okay. So that's when they found it, which sparked an increase in the importation of enslaved African people to power this newly profitable mining. So they had to bring more people because now they had, the natives of the land, they were doing, the agriculture side. So they had to bring people to mine out all of the gold and the silver and all of the diamonds out. So the transportation systems were developed for the mining. Uh, Developed for the mining infrastructure, and population boom from immigrants seeking to take part in gold and diamond mining. So now, a lot of people they was shipping people down to Brazil so they can take part in it, so they can help run the slaves. That became their jobs, and that's how they start building an economy off of this, right? The demand for enslaved Africans did not wane after the decline of the mining industry the second half of the 18th century. Cattle ranching and foodstuff production proliferated after the population growth, both of which relied heavily on slave labor. 1.7 million slaves were imported to Brazil from Africans from 1700 to 1800, and the rise of coffee in the 1830s further expanded the Atlantic slave trade. So now, like you got the coffee beans. They are the best coffee beans come from Brazil, right? So now coffee is now the next thing they trying to bring out. Now they got slaves, doing all of the agriculture for coffee beans. Brazil was the last country in the Western world to abolish the enslavement of human beings. By the time slavery was abolished on May 13, 1888, an estimated 5.8 million enslaved people had been transported from Africa to Brazil. This was 40% of the total number of enslaved people trafficked from Africa to the Americas, according to one estimate, while another source estimated the total as high as 12.5 million, which will push the percentage over 45% of the total 10.7 million slaves that survived the journey. So a lot of people didn't make the journey coming over here, right? This is slavery in medieval Portugal. The Portuguese became involved in the African slave trade during the first Reconquista or the Reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula, mainly through the mediation of the Albuquerque, the person tasked with the rescue of Portuguese captive slaves and prisoners of war. And then later in 1441, long before the colonization of Brazil, but now as slave traders. Slaves exported from Africa during this initial period of the Portuguese slave trade primarily came from Mauritania and later Upper Guinea coast. Scholars estimate that as many as 156,000 slaves were exported from 1441 to 1521 to Iberia and the Atlantic islands from the African coast. The trade made the shift from Europe to the Americas as a primary destination for slaves around 1518. Prior to this time, slaves who were required to pass through Portugal to be taxed before making their way to the Americas. So now they got to get taxes on them, so they had to bring them up to Portugal first. Then they'll take them on down to America so they can get the taxes from it. Slavery begins in Brazil. Indian enslavement before European arrival. Long before Europeans came to Brazil and began colonization, indigenous groups such as the Papineses and the Guaianeses, the Tupinambas, and the Acadians enslaved captured members of their tribes. They captured, lived, and worked with their new communities as trophy to the tribe's martial prowess. Some enslaved would eventually escape but could never reattain their previous status in their own tribe because of the strong social stigma against slavery and rival tribes. so they had like, it was like shame. So like if you got captured, you was a slave, you was looked upon like as being like, just like as, like if you Jamaican and you go over to New York, they gonna call you a Yankee now, right? It's all like little petty things that we would do amongst each other. But you notice, if you escape, you don't see none here about nobody coming to hunt you down, no slave patrols,
Right.
none of that. You just had to serve the person because you lost the battle. You know what I'm saying? You lost the battle. So that's anywhere. If you lost the battle, you now had to be a slave.
Right.
Israel enslaved other Israelites, at times. Not to say, not to the way that we, because slavery has been made into like, slavery in some ways is evil, but the word of slavery is not necessarily slavery. So it's like they use the same word, but the slavery with us is more like a employee. The slavery when people put us under is you not getting anything. You're gonna barely have food and water. And if you do, you're gonna have the worst food and the dirtiest water. That's why we ate pig guts, man. Chitlins. The word chitlins came from, they used to call it shitlins. So it just became chitlins after a while. Because you eating the feces of the pigs. So they would eat the rest of the pig and you get the guts, which you're supposed to take out. If you know anything about cleaning up animals, preparing it, you always got to take the guts out. The guts got to go, the organs you get rid of that, and you leave, the hide to actually eat the meat of. They would take the bones and make tools out of. But the guts, you throw the guts down. But that's what they fed to you. Because they didn't even want you to eat nothing of, like pig was already unclean. They didn't want you to get the premium, what they call the premium pig. They gave you the worst part of the pig, man. Go ahead.
Oh, sloppy, Adawan. What you saying is heavy because, like, when them Edomites came on this land, they know these people that was over here was eating that type of stuff. So they went and killed all the bison, all the everything that they knew that they survived off of.
Yep.
And then gave them something. And gave them something that they knew they would not eat. And that's how you destroy a people.
Yep.
You take everything from them that they survive on and you give them something. And that's Salaki.
Yep. And there's reports of them, they didn't eat unclean animals. There's reports of that. They didn't eat pig. They felt like they stayed away from that. That's why you say they ate the bison. They ate the one that they had the Native Americans, in North America was the
buffalo.
The buffalo, yep, the Cape buffalo. That was their one. But that was their animal. They would follow the buffalo. If they was hungry, they'll kill one, feed everybody off that damn one buffalo. And then they'll just follow with them. And that was the nomadic Gadites that would do that. But then they would go in to try to take them, starve them out. They would go and kill all of the buffalo. Like there's a picture that I saved. It was like one man standing up on a mountain of buffalo that they had killed, man.
Yes.
So we wanna, and then now they wanna do stuff like save the whales, man. Save the endangered animals. But man, it's crazy. If you look up who killed the whales, it was them. Because they blubber can make a certain type of like the oil. I forget what they used. I forget what they do with it. But that was real precious at some point. The oil that you get from a whale, you can make so much money. It was highly desired. So they was going around killing every whale they saw. All right, in effort to try to make money off of that whale. So they the ones that killed the whales, man. You want to know why the whales is in danger? It's them. Why is anything? Why is there earthquakes, man? It's earthquakes because the oil that seeps from your body when you die, that goes into the earth, it collects, it goes into the plate, so the plates can move freely. What they doing now? You go to California, all they doing is chugging out all the oil out, man.
Like yeah, I've heard something similar to that. What you're talking about? Like they so evil. They take the throw up from the well. It's called ambergris. The ambergris is like a it's like an ingredient that use or something they eat, but it's called ambergris. But they take it's just whale vomit.
Mm-hmm.
They 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 destroy everything. Like you take whale vomit and make it is valuable. Um, I can't see the price on it, but it's like a what they call it a delicacy or something.
Oh, they
like
eat
that.
the whale vomit?
Yes.
Oh hell, see. See what I'm saying? They
It's a delicacy.
Go ahead.
So I got one, if I may, one of the main uses of the well, especially like the sperm whale, the heathen, the devil, he used it for cosmetics. You know what I'm saying?
Yep,
That's
that's
one
one
of
of
his
them.
main. That's one of his main uses for like the whales and stuff like that. For lipstick, mascara, and,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
It
things
was
of that
something else
nature.
too,
He
though.
used the whale to make items.
It was something else too. I can't remember what it was, but they would take the whales, their blubber, to make other stuff. They had a lot of uses for it, and like I said, if you go kill one whale and do that, that's one thing. But they was on a mission to damn near take all of the whales. They was trying to kill all the whales around, and then sell them off. Right? Go ahead.
So I got one. They saying the whale blubber was used for soap and as a component to make makeup that contributes to glossy shine. Blubber is also turned into fuel for lamps, wax for candles, and
Yep,
grease
all
for
of that.
machinery.
All of that. They used that for all of that because you know they had to have the makeup because you know they women. Ugh. You know once they get past 30, they look like they 80. You know what I'm saying? they age like milk. You know what I'm saying? That's how they look, man. They age terribly. So they needed that makeup to cover up they women's face, so they can look at them the right way. So, you know what I'm saying? But there's a lot of makeup, like you said, soap, oil for lamps, and you know, all of this stuff, you know, it was a high commodity at this time. So they would go and kill the whales, and now they want to save the whales that they killed.
Dang.
That's how they do. Like they killed all the Native Americans. Damn, they're trying to wipe them off, and they're gonna name the Cleveland Indians, the Washington Redskins. Want to name stuff after you, like Chicago and Chicago, Wyoming, Wisconsin. All of those is Dakotas. All of those is Indian names, Native American names. All of those. India, what do you think that's from? Indiana?
India,
So they named all of that. I think Michigan too. Hell, all of those places named after that. Sioux, like you got Sioux City in Iowa. That's another place. Iowa, Sioux City, Iowa.
So like there, Indianapolis, that's Iroquois.
Exactly. All those places, man. They named them after they killed them all. They're gonna name places after you. So, and that's the same thing they do here, man. Let's see here. So they want to talk about the enslavement, like I said, the enslavement, but it wasn't like I said, it wasn't terrible like they did to us. They were still, it didn't say that they didn't live, that they only made it to 23. You had none of that. You just was a worker, man. You was an employee. And then it says for enslaved the cannibalistic tribes, execution for devouring purposes. Cannibalistic ceremonies can happen at any moment, of course, right? Such reported actions of cannibalism and intertribal ransom were used to justify the enslavement of Native Americans throughout the colonial period. Just like I said, they used that as a way to say that you are savages, you aren't civilized. So we could come and take you over. That's all it was. It says such reported actions of cannibalism and intertribal ransom, because they feel like they're the civilized of the earth, right?
Okay.
They ain't acting real civilized in Ukraine and Russia though, is they? Right? He said the Portuguese was seen as fighting a just war when enslaving indigenous populations, supposedly rescuing them from their own cruelty. So now, us enslaving you, beating your back in, making it so that you didn't live longer than 23, I'm saving you from your own cruelty, man. Boy, these devils got a lot of nerve, boy. This focus on pre-colonial enslavement has been criticized as it flies in the face of the reality that Portuguese enslavement of the Amerindians and later Africans was practiced at a much larger scale than prior local enslavement practices. So it was at a much larger scale. Basically, they would say, well, they make each other slaves, so why can't we make them slaves? You might add 3 slaves in the whole damn tribe, and they're going to slave everybody. Go ahead.
Ooh, so I guess heavy that you say that, because that's the same thing they say to this day. So
Exactly.
black folks killing black folks, so what's the problem?
Exactly.
We kill them too, like it.
What's wrong with that?
That's like it.
We put them in prison to save themselves. That's why we got to put them in prison. So they don't kill each other.
Wow.
Religious leaders at the time also pushed back against this narrative. In 1653, Padre Antonio Vieira delivered a sermon in the city of São Luís de Maranhão, in which he maintained that the forced enslavement of natives was a sin, calling out his listeners for thinking that the capture of Indians was justified and giving the pious name of rescue to a sale so forced and violent. So they were saying people that they were rescuing them. And so even like even the religious leaders at the time was looking at, nah, you ain't rescuing them. you using what you call it, what's the term they call it, a Trojan horse. Using a Trojan horse to say that you saving them, but the real thing is you want profit, you want money, you want to be rich, and that's what they were using them for, to become more wealthy. Indian enslavement after European arrival. The Portuguese first traveled to Brazil in 1500 under the expedition of Pedro Alvares Cabral, which he spoke about him in the last article. Though the first Portuguese settlement was not established until 1516. Soon after the arrival of the Portuguese, it became clear a commercial colonial undertaking would be difficult on such a vast continent. Indigenous slave labor was quickly turned to for agricultural workforce needs, particularly due to the labor demands of the expanding sugar industry. Due to this pressure, enslaving expeditions for Native Americans became common. So, and they had to get, they were determined that they had to get more slaves because they needed more people to work at the agriculture. But this sugar industry was so big, so now they just went around enslaving people. That's not what the natives did. They didn't, it was a time they had a fight, had a little beef, and they would come bring you over here. But if you end up escaping and going back, they didn't come and try to hunt you down, man. Man, if they found you as a slave, they would tie you up to the back of the horse, and drag you miles to go back to where to come back to your plantation, man. They weren't doing this. They wasn't cruel, man. The only people that's been cruel is these devils, man. Despite opposition from the Jesuits, who had their own ways of controlling native populations through institutions like ideas or villages, where they concentrated Indian populations for ease of conversion. As the population of coastal Native Americans dwindled due to harsh conditions, warfare, and disease, slave traders increasingly moved further inland in banderas or formal slaving expeditions. So the Jesuits, the Jesuits, a lot of things they were trying to do, they were trying to say that this was cruel, and they also was trying to convert everybody over to Christianity. They say, well, if we convert them over to Christianity, then they won't be savages, so now you can't come and kill them. But you still, even if you were Christian, you just enslaved in the mind now. You're not for your people no more. Because if you're a Christian or a Catholic, that means you for your oppressor. You for Caesar Borgia. That's who you for. You're not for your people no more. These expeditions were composed of banderantes, adventurers who penetrated steadily westward in the search for Indian slaves. Banderantes came from a wide spectrum of backgrounds, including plantation owners, traders, and members of the military, as well as people of mixed ancestry and previously captured Indian slaves. Banderantes frequently targeted Jesuit missions, capturing thousands of natives from them in the 1600s. Conflict between settlers who wanted to enslave Indians and Jesuits who sought to protect them was a common pressure throughout the era, particularly as disease reduced the Indian populations. In 1661, for example, Padre Antonio Vieira's attempts to protect native populations led to an uprising and the temporary expulsion of the Jesuits in Maranja and Pará. Beyond the capture of new slaves and recapture of runaways, see, they were, like I said, they captured new slaves and they were trying to recapture runaways. You didn't hear nothing about that when it came to the people that actually, the natives of the land, the actual Israelites. They didn't recapture you. Well, if you escaped, you just escaped. All right. Banderas could also act as large quasi-military forces tasked with exterminating native populations who refused to be subjected to rule by the Portuguese. So now they didn't want to be ruled by the Portuguese and become a Christian. They can now exterminate them. That means kill them. They also were always on the lookout for precious metals like gold and silver, of course, as evident through an account of one Ignacio Correa Pamplona's expeditions. Banderantes like to think of themselves as brave civilizers who tamed the wildness of frontier by exterminating native populations and providing land for settlers. So they thought themselves civilized. They thought themselves as patriots. They doing this for their country. They could be compensated heavily by the crown for their efforts. Pamplona was, for example, rewarded with land grants. So they got land grants. So the whole time they were telling black people that you got to raise yourself up by your bootstraps. They just throwing away land. Here you go. You get some land, you get some land. And there's reports that showing they just was giving away land like by the acres, just throwing it away, giving it to people, giving it to all of them. But then black people, when you went to go get land, you got the highest interest possible, highest interest rates, and you still paid it off. And even when you did pay it off, they came back and still killed your whole family and took it from you and didn't give you anything back. And you can look this, I'll see if I can find something on it, but at some point. But yeah, this was not something small. This was a widespread thing. taking black slave owners, black not slave owners, like black landowners, they land and just giving it away to other devils. So this was widespread. That's why we own so much land at the turn of the 1900s, and now we don't own anything almost.
Right.
Your only thing you might own a little bit is your backyard. And most people don't even have a backyard no more. The way they making these houses. But yet they $300,000, but your backyard look like a patio. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
In 1629, Antonio Raposa Tavares led a bandera composed of 2,000 allied Indios, 900 Mamelucos or mestizos, and 69 whites to find precious and metals and stones and to capture Indians for slavery. This expedition alone was responsible for the enslavement of over 60,000 indigenous people. So now they went and grabbed all of this to start trying to take over. They even got our own brothers to fight it, to help them. As time went on, though, it became increasingly clear that indigenous slavery alone would not meet the needs of sugar plantation labor demands. For one thing, the life expectancy for Native American slaves was very low. Overwork and disease decimated Native populations. Furthermore, Native Americans were familiar with the land, meaning they had the incentive and ability to escape from their slave owners. For these reasons, starting in the 1570s, African slaves became the labor force of choice of the sugar plantations. Indian slavery did continue in Brazil's frontiers until well into the 18th century, but on a smaller scale than African plantation slavery. So they started bringing in people from Africa because they couldn't live long because of basically all the disease that they had. But us over there, we had already been exposed to a lot of those diseases because that's the old world over there. This the new world. They've been separated from over here, over in Asia, Africa, and Europe. They've been separated from over there for thousands of years. So like the Black Plague, influenza, all of those diseases that was prevalent over there, malaria, all of these diseases that was over there, it never came over there to them. They never experienced it. So now they hadn't built any type of immunity to it. So now when they came over there with them, somebody, they just might get a little cough, and then it wipe out all of the damn Native Americans that one cough.
Oh God.
You know what I'm saying? That's why Corona was killing so many people because they hadn't been exposed to it. And now, you see the rates is dropping and people dying because most people have been exposed to Corona now. Right? And then we got vaccines for it. Right? As time went, okay, let me see. So they didn't want them because they can escape better, right? Enslavement of Africans, this of course is the Southern Kingdom. In the first 250 years after the colonization of the land, roughly 70% of all immigrants to the colony were enslaved people. Indigenous slaves remained much cheaper during this time than their African counterparts, though they did not suffer horrendous death rates from European diseases. Although the average African slave lived to only be 23 years old because of terrible work conditions. This was still about 4 years longer than indigenous slaves, which was a big contribution to the high price of African slaves. African slaves were also more desirable due to their experience working in sugar plantations. In a particular mill in Suave Vicente in the 1540s, for example, African slaves were said to have held all the most skilled positions, including the crucial role of sugar master. Even though they were vastly outnumbered by native slaves at the time, it is impossible to pinpoint when the first African slaves arrived in Brazil, but estimates range anywhere in the 1530s. Regardless, African slaves was established by at least 1549 when the first governor of Brazil, Tomé de Sousa, arrived with slaves sent from the king himself. So now, the slaves, the Southern Kingdom brothers was more desirable because, like I said, they could live longer in those conditions, and plus they already, we were like, don't think we weren't slaves in Africa, man. We were slaves there too, so we was growing stuff for them as well, right? They seen what we grew and how we did stuff. That's why they captured us, man. They didn't want us on their land. That's why Africans don't see you as their people. They just see as you as dark skinned. That's it. But you don't act African. You don't stink like them. Right?
Right.
You smell too good to be African. You know what I'm saying? That's how they feel about us, man. What's that, fourth dimension? Oh, here, no. You know what I'm saying? It's a lie here. All right. Enslavement of other groups. Slavery was not endured by Native Americans or blacks. As the distinction between prisoners of war and slaves was blurred, enslavement, although at a far lesser scale of captured Europeans, also took place. Of course, they're going to try to mention that,
Right.
The Dutch were reported to have sold Portuguese captured in Brazil as slaves and of using African slaves to Dutch Brazil. There are also reports of Brazilians enslaved by Barbary pirates while crossing the ocean. In the subsequent centuries, many freed slaves and descendants of slaves became slave owners. Eduardo Franca Paiva estimates that about 2/3 of slave owners were either freed slaves or descendants of slaves. See, I was trying to put that in there, trying to say this was not the truth. They were not. If they were owners of slaves, the Brazilians wouldn't be as poor as they is now. Right?
Right.
Brazilians, they are poor.
Yeah.
They live in the projects just like you do. So these, I'm reading this to kind of show just the lies that's out here. They were not slave owners. If the people were slave owners, they were the sons of the slave owners, right? Of the real slave owners. They were just their children. Because of course, you're not gonna have, this slave. Our people, our women bad as hell, right?
Yeah, right.
You got her. This is supposed to be your property. You're gonna lay with her.
Right.
Them devils gonna lay with her. And they lay with her, have a baby. Now that baby is a little bit higher up than the rest of the slaves, because it's their son, right?
Right.
Somebody says Salagi.
If I may, if you just said it so heavy, when you're talking about the ghettos and all that, and in Brazil they call them favelas, and it's way worse than any ghetto that you could imagine in America.
Yep.
Just like you say, the foreigners, the heathens, they'll go down there and they'll rape the women basically, and leave them down there with the babies, or they'll put them in high standard down there. That's where a lot of the stars will come from. A lot of those soccer players will come from because their fathers are heathens.
Yep. So they would get a little bit more status, because they got a heathen father. So when they say descendants, like they don't look at descendants like we do. Like we don't go by the mother, we don't go by the mother. They'll go by the mother and say, hey, these are descendants of a slave, right? Okay. One of the most important markers of freedom of a slave was the adoption of a last name upon being freed. These names would often be the family names of their ex-owners, either in part or in full. Since many slaves had the same or similar Christian name assigned from their baptism, it was common for a slave to be called both their Portuguese or Christian name as well as the name of their master. Maria, for example, became known as Senhor Santana Maria. Thus, it was mostly a matter of convenience when a slave was freed for him or her to adopt the surname of their ex-owners for assimilation into the community as a free person. Obtaining freedom was not a guarantee of escape from poverty or many aspects from slave life. Frequently, legal freedom did not come with a change in occupation for the ex-slave. However, there was increased opportunity for both sexes to become involved in wage earning. Women ex-slaves largely dominated marketplaces selling food and goods in urban areas like Salvador, while in general, while a significant percent of African-born men freed from slavery became employed as skilled artisans, including work as sculptors, carpenters, and jewelers. Another area important to African-born ex-slaves was their work as slavers upon being granted in their freedom. In fact, purchase of slaves was a standard practice for ex-slaves who could afford it. This is evidence of the lack of common identity among those born in Africa and shipped to Brazil, for it was much more common for ex-slaves to engage in the slave trade themselves than to take up any cause related to abolition or resistance to slavery. Of course, the people that they freed, but the thing that they try to like gloss over is they only, if you notice, they only free. You gotta like when you listen to the way that they do, you gotta really pay attention to the words they use. It said first that they assimilated into their culture. So that means you talking about the people who's the assimilators? Martin Luther King, who try to get along with the devils.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So they assimilate, they gonna take on their name. So of course they're gonna take on that culture of them. Because now they became Christian. And now they gonna look at their own brothers as being uncivilized, man. That this was just a way to make us clash. They did the same they did the same thing with the Mayans and the Aztecs. They would go get us to fight so we can never come together. Because they fear Israel coming back together. They seen what Israel does when Israel is together. They know the Bible. They knew it. Just before the internet, all they had time to do was read. You know what I'm saying? They didn't have Facebook and Instagram. So they knew what the Israelites did. Don't think that they didn't know that we was Israelites.
Right.
Don't think they didn't know that. This was not something that was uncommon. Now they destroyed a lot of the research, a lot of the books that was on it. So it was very few that survived. But don't think they didn't know, like the hate, like don't get me wrong, the people that was, the regular workers probably didn't know. But the higher ups knew that we was Israelites.
Right.
That's why they plotted to do the stuff that they did, man. They plotted to keep us fighting each other. That's why like what the Bloods and the Crips they didn't fight each other until COINTELPRO. They made them start fighting each other.
Okay.
So that's all it was. They made them start fighting each other. All right. Brazilian-born slaves and ex-slaves. A Brazilian-born slave, was born into slavery, meaning their identity was based on very different factors than those of the African-born who had once known legal freedom. Skin color was a significant factor in determining the status of African descendants born in Brazil. Lighter-skinned slaves had both higher chances of manumission as well as better social mobility if they were granted freedom, making it important in the identity of both Brazilian-born slaves and ex-slaves. So that's why a lot of the Brazilians are lighter skinned, because if it's something that's more desirable, a lot of people would go to be that. Like they would, the person that has the lighter skin traits will have all of the babies because they feel as though, just like with anything, like if you have like a trait that everybody like when you growing up, how like the dude that had the green eyes all the women wanted to talk to him, right? And then especially with women, if they see that's like a sense of power, they all gonna try to lay with this man so they can have babies, and so that they babies can now have more status and be able to move around. Because that's the difference between men and women. Women want survival, and they wanna put in they wanna have the man that they have a child with. They want that child to have the best chance, of course.
Right.
Men, we know we gotta fight for that.
Right.
So that's kind of like the difference between us, right? All right. The term crioulo was primarily used in the early 19th century and meant Brazilian born and black. Mulatto was used to refer to lighter skinned Brazilian born Africans, who often were the children of both African and European descent. Here you go. As compared to their African born counterparts. Manumission for long-term good behavior or obedience upon the owner's death, which is much more likely. Thus, unpaid manumission was as much more likely path to freedom for the Brazilian-born slaves than for Africans, as well as manumission in general. Mulattoes also had a higher incidence of manumission, which most likely is the likelihood that they were the children of a slave and an owner. All right. Let's see here. Oh yeah, and I gotta bring out the slave revolts. I like black people saying we not gonna take it.
All right.
You know what I'm saying? I'll skim over a couple of these real quick. All right, we're gonna wrap this up, all right?
Okay.
1798, the revolt of the Alpha-Ates. The revolt of the Alpha-Ates in 1798, also called the Bahian conspiracy and revolt of the Tailors, after the trade of many of the leaders, and recently also called revolt of Buzios, which was a slave rebellion and then captaincy of Bahia in the state of Brazil. Unlike the Inconfidencia Mineira, a lot of these in Portuguese, of 1789, it was a separatist movement with a popular base and extensive black participation. Both were largely inspired by the French Revolution. The leaders who were prosecuted were mostly free mulattoes, but a second group of wealthier whites who encouraged the revolt were not prosecuted. The objectives of the rebelling biennials, according to Clovis Morrow, were much more radical, and the proposal to liberate the slaves was one of the main goals. Its leaders and members included free blacks, black slaves, pardo slaves, free pardos, artisans, and tailors. Those who were the most oppressed or discriminated class of Bahia colonial society, with many slaves living in Bahia, the probability of revolts and rebellions ran high. The elites of the area were frightened that if rebellion or revolts did happen, they would be similar to the Haitian Revolution. Because of the significant participation of Bahia's lower classes, the revolt has also been called the first Brazilian social revolution. 1807, and the slaves were planning a revolt that would take place on May 28 during Corpus Christi celebrations. 6 days before the revolt would take place, they were betrayed by a slave loyal to his master. Damn bastard. The master went to the government and he was skeptical about the situation. However, he sent spies into the community and he learned that a subversive, spies, right, going to a pro, and he learned that a subversive plan was real and growing stronger as the 828th approached. A day before the rebellion took place, the governor mounted specific patrols in the city with its exits and entrances under surveillance and rural officers on the roads. The house that was the center of the planner was surrounded and searched. After being searched, the alleged leaders and captains were taken prisoner. Many weapons were confiscated from the house, such as 400 arrows, a bundle of rods, to be used as bows, piles of rope, knives, and one shotgun. Royal officers caught 3 of the ringleaders who had fled earlier that afternoon, and military patrols on rounds caught a few more identified as agents or enticers. The goal of the uprising is believed to have been to capture ships in the harbor and make a massive flight to Africa. 1814. The rebellion of 1814 overshadowed the previous ones in numbers and participants in violence. Starting on February 28th, slave fishermen began to burn down part of the harbor, killing the foreman and most of his family. Most had crashed. The rebels proceeded to head the village of Ataipon. Resistance was met when they were trying to leave and go to the next village. Troops from Salvador then encountered a bloody battle with the rebels, which left the rebels with 50 fewer men. 4 of the captured slaves were hanged in public, and 12 were deported to Portuguese colonies in Africa. In 1835, the Muslim slave revolt, 1835, began January 24th by a rebellion organizer, Malays or Muslim Africans. The revolt took place on the streets of Salvador and lasted for 3 hours. During that time, 70 people were killed, and a report of more than 500 were sentenced to death, imprisoned, whipped, or deported. Reyes argues that if you bring these numbers in today's time, with Salvador being 1.5 million, over 12,000 people will be sentenced to some form of punishment. Within these hearings, Africans spoke out about the rebellion as well as part of their cultural, social, and religious and domestic lives. The testimonies from courts and oppressors' descriptions of these Africans that enslaved brought out priceless testimonies of African culture in the Americas. All right. Anybody got any questions or comments? Any questions or comments? Going once, going twice. All right. With that, I pass the class over to Precinct Officer 50, Mashallah.
Good class, I want. Yeah. All right, Isupk security announcements. Well, the Isupk started out at 1 West, 125th Street, Harlem, New York. Rule for new brother or sister. When a new brother or sister comes into the school, they are off limits for 6 months. They are to be saluted only. Salakia. They are to be saluted only. They are here to share themselves with the world. If they need transportation, the teacher will arrange it. After 6 months, if a brother or sister has an interest in a particular person, he or she must get permission from the head to speak to a brother or sister. There's another 6 months in which a brother or sister will court each other. After this 6 months period, the brother or sister will get permission from the head to marry. Ties, which is a commandment, Numbers 18 through 21, Malachi 3, 8 through 10. Ma'ashra means 10th in the Hebrew, 10% of every penny of any increase the Lord gives you. Give to the Treasury Department or teacher. Priest fund, free will offering. For priests, not mandatory, whatsoever amount you would like. Upcoming holy convocations, Feast of First Fruits. So Salak, y'all one. We still in the Feast of First Fruits, right?
Yeah, it's for 50 days.
Come. We are still in the Feast of First Fruits. It's for 50 days. Remind Akim and Akwatim to check the bulletin board in the hallway. If anyone wants to be a trooper in the school, start wearing all black boots, shirts, pants, headband, and scarves, and Google address every time they are heading to the school. And with that, we'll get a teacher a courtesy salute. Men of Israel, Amijam, which means stand. Amijam Shabbat. Amijam, Barak, Yahweh Hashem Yahweh Shabbat Barakatam.
Yabashim Yab Shabrakatah.
Yamatab means hands down. Class dismissed.